Hello, good day. Thank you for tuning in to Reparative Game Design and Psychosocial Disability. Game design is healing. Whether you are tuning in live or watching the recording, we're happy to have you either way. Before we go through, I want to give a rough idea of what this panel is going to look like. First, I'm going to talk about for 15 or so minutes, and then we'll have a chance for a Q&A. Feel free to write your comments in the chat, or if needed, feel free to stop me for clarification. I have a script of what I'm saying, so please don't worry about stopping me because your understanding of what I'm saying is important. So I'm going to start with who am I, why am I here, that sort of thing. Then I'll talk a bit about what is reparative game design. Then we're going to talk about the 3 principles of reparative game design, which is repair, care, and share. And then I'm going to talk about my accidental reparative game design experience, because while looking into reparative game design, I realized that it's something I've accidentally done in the past. Alrighty, so starting off with a quick who am I? Hi, I'm Walkayard. I'm a neurodivergent researcher and game designer, and I love to talk about the way games can have an impact on our understanding of ourselves and others. What does it mean to represent something like neurodiversity? Who sees it, and how do they remember it? And when it comes to lesser represented groups, how did the few representations that do exist influence public opinion on the group and on the personal opinion of the self? That's all to say that I started here because I saw a rather upsetting representation of autism in a game, and then realized that this may be many people's first impression of autism. And I just did not like that. I won't go on too big of a tangent, but I will say that representations of neurodiversity are few and far between, and the stuff that does exist typically falls into stereotype. It honestly can be disheartening, but that's why we need more movements like the Neurodiversity Pride Game Jam to encourage more neurodiverse game developers to go on and create. So, in other words, thank you for being here. My works mostly focus on my own experiences growing up as a transgender mixed neurodivergent kid. Anything from the experience of being in the closet to navigating social situations and the anxiety of not quite getting everything the same way everyone else does. In my own way, I was doing a version of reparative game design and didn't even know it. My games are very personal to me, and I love making games in the effort to make someone else with similar experiences feel like they have someone to relate to. I will hopefully be designing something as well for this year's Neurodiversity Pride Game Jam. To speak to the things I have on screen, the game on top was Seeking Patrons, and it was all about trying to determine what is the best thing to tell the person who came in for a fortune reading. You could choose to tell them the truth or lie to them about what their reading says, and it was much more about pleasing the customer than really telling the truth every single time. And then the bottom image I have there is from another Game Jam game. I think that one was the Global Game Jam. And it was In on the Joke, where the whole idea was that you're at a comedy club, but you don't understand any of the jokes. So you have to watch the audience and the speaker to figure out when to laugh. And if you end up laughing at the wrong moment, everyone turns around and stares at you, which is very, very anxiety-inducing. That's enough about me, though. What are reparative games? Reparative games are games whose aim heals the player. By extension, reparative game design is the idea that the process of designing a game itself can be healing, and can be a healing method of the game creator. This is a big step away from what we understand the game design industry. There have been many stories that have come out about the burnout of game designers from working many hours of overtime to meet deadlines. There's this normalization of crunch culture, which can have a serious toll on our mental and physical health. Additionally, the larger game design industry as a whole has more white, able, sane, cishet men in the area than the marginalized. And it can also be greatly discouraging or worse, dangerous for the marginalized to be in the game design environment. It's so important that we build these pockets for marginalized identities so that it may not be the case in the future. Even the setting of a game jam itself can feel like the perpetuation of things like crunch culture because you're required to make a game within a set time. I will admit that I myself don't usually take care of myself when participating in game jams. I will mostly be referring to an article on reparative game design by Kara Sohn, who is the person who coined the term. The article is more research focused and focused on psychosocial disability, but it's still highly relevant to the neurodivergent experiences because psychosocial disability and neurodiversity are very closely related. Reparative game design is focused on three main principles. The first is repair. And I know there's a lot of text on the slide, but I wanted to make sure that every single point I was going to bring up was here. So, going down the list, repair. Games are no more healing than any other art form. Games will never cure anyone. Cure is not the goal. Make work that changes the media landscape, adding to a culture oriented towards making life more livable for those with psychosocial disabilities. Do not only represent psychosocial disability, but design for it. No score, no winning, no losing, no good paths, no bad paths, no one right way to play, no punishment, no reward. Be emotionally challenging, not mechanically challenging. Describing some feelings as good and some feelings as bad are judgments. They might ease classification, but are not inherent or true. Feelings are a political resource, and everything is an experiment and an exploration. Repair is focused on the structure of the game and how one can use structure itself as a means of exploration. Games are much more than their narrative. How you set up to share a story can also tell a lot of the story you're sharing. For example, if you make it so that you require earning in-game currency to unlock certain aspects of the game, regardless of the other themes, also becomes about pushing yourself to earn money to unlock more things. Reparative games are focused on exploration of a thing. It can be hard to imagine a game without good or bad paths. The way I do this is I pretend that every path just is. It exists, and it is just as is. When telling the player about it, I don't tell the player how to feel about it, and I don't tell myself how to feel about it. It just is. Additionally, there's a focus on healing rather than cure. Cure is like a very medicalized thing. When we are perceived as sick, the goal is to make us not sick. But when it comes to psychosocial disability and or neurodiversity, when we try to look for a cure, we're also saying that there is nothing but bad things about us, and also puts all the blame of this sickness on the person rather than the environment that labels us abnormal or wrong. So in this case, repair is also about addressing this idea of the environment, the social aspects, the structure of the system, the way our buildings are built, are made in such a way that labels us as something abnormal or something needing of a cure, when it's something that can be completely made up by the way things are built in the first place. The second is care. So care, going down the list of points that Kara Sohn makes, recognizing not only the labor of the time spent working, but also the preparation and the recovery. Do not expect to work like a machine. Consistent, always productive, not emotionally affected by mood, physical experience, environment, food, weather, past experiences, brain fog, pain, injustice, neurochemicals, microbiome, our partner's mood, noise, etc. We are not machines. Capitalism has set up unrealistic and unattainable work expectations. These expectations actively damage and drain us. Resist wanting to try to live up to them. Know our cycles of work. Know that some are in our control and some are out of our control. Rest without guilt. Art does not need suffering to be made. Effect cannot be quantified. Foster emotional self-reflection rather than aiming to funnel the players into a specific emotion. Do not overwork and do not ask players to overplay. Be cautious and grateful of how much time is asked of the players. Remind ourselves and players that there is life beyond the screen. Make space for self-reflection in the game. Emotional choices, diary entries, mood trackers, pauses, timeouts, direct questions, and surveys. Care is focused on the labor of making games and playing games. For us in our setting, it means taking care of yourself while in this game jam, even before the game jam starts. Making shouldn't be at the sacrifice of yourself, and you shouldn't feel bad if you don't get everything you wanted done for this game jam in the time frame of the game jam. You can always update the game later. You as a person are important, and resting isn't lazy nor not on topic. We would much prefer if you gave us a piece of paper explaining your game and took care of yourself than a full game, and if you stepped away from the experience drained and upset. It's about asking reasonable things of yourself and of your players, and giving both you and the players space to reflect on things that happen in the game and outside the game. One way that we, as the Neurodiversity Pride Game Jam, have tried to enact this sort of care is making sure that the theme is already up. The theme has been up for about a month and a half. There won't be any surprises. We won't go, by the way, you have to add this to your game, because now you have more time to enact care in your own way, to take care of yourself and do the game jam at a pace that is okay for you. The reason why we have the week-long part of it is partly to make sure that those who want to gather can gather and come together as a community. The third principle is share. So again, going down the list with from Kara Stone, be vulnerable. Be radically open during the creation stage. Edit after it's already created, if necessary. Ask others for help. There is beauty in interdependence. The process of making is about coming to an understanding, not demonstrating understanding. A good game is not determined by a game one wants to play all the time. Meaningful experiences last beyond the playtime. Perfection does not exist. Nothing is ever perfect, only expression of that moment in time's preferences, desires, expectations, conditions, and experiences. Feelings are powerful and should not be avoided, but consider how they may affect potential players. Will it make the game inaccessible to certain groups? Consider the audience as someone in the disabled communities, experiencing psychosocial disability and many forms of debilitation. Not an audience we must explain our experiences to. Sorry, my nose is itchy. Share is all about sharing our perspectives, experiences, and knowledge. It's valuable. It means being willing to put your experience out there, or at least try it when first starting to create your game. It may be in the end, when you make your game, you don't end up publishing because it was too personal. That's okay. You can always adjust the game to something you're more comfortable for, or just keep it for yourself. Your game doesn't need to be big or polished to mean a lot to you and those interacting with it. One of my favorite games, We Become What We Behold, is a 5-minute experience that you play once. Your game doesn't have to be big. Sharing your game means sharing a part of you. Sharing can be done before the game is done and through the act of asking for help or asking for others' opinions. I like how they also talk about strong emotions that may be in the game, but sharing means being careful about how you share as well, not only for yourself, but for people engaging in the game. Another point about sharing is the idea that people you are sharing with are not people you need to explain yourself to. Often when creating games about lesser talked groups or topics, or any sort of media really, talking about lesser talked groups or topics, there's this feeling to break it down for the normal audiences. It's understandable. Wanting to be understood is very relatable, and I am the type to fall into this pitfall when designing games and other things. However, it's not reparative to you to feel the need to justify your existence or why things are the way they are in your game. That isn't to say that you, if you want to explain some things, you shouldn't. There's just a difference between designing for a group who gets it and a group who doesn't. For me, I realized the more I tried to explain myself and justify myself, the more I felt like I was making myself come across as abnormal. Someone who is neurotypical or falls into what's considered normal doesn't feel the need to justify or explain the decisions they made for things that are about themselves, because there's this inherent understanding that we understand what they're saying because they are the default. Why can't we treat ourselves the same? Why can't we treat ourselves as normal? I also wanted to talk about my own example of reparative game design. For the 2025 Neurodiversity Pride Game Jam, I made a game called Cats in the Box. I will admit this was a very, very last minute decision. I made the game within 4 hours or 8 hours, around there, on the second day, I'm pretty sure. And last year it was only a 2-day game jam. But I realized I could make something, so I did. I wanted to speak about the feeling of having to hide neurodivergent traits because of how uncomfortable neurotypicals can be with neurodivergent traits. From my experience, there's a certain window of tolerance that neurotypical people have, and eventually if you pass that window, they'll find you to be too much or abnormal. So I drew a box. That was the perceived window of tolerance, what I assumed would be the borders of being able to express myself. Then I drew a lot of cats. Big cats, little cats, kittens. I like cats. I labeled them all with different neurodivergent traits. The game itself is a point and drag game where you can fill the box with cats, but the idea is that you don't stack them. And there are way too many cats for the box, so in the end you had to choose what would go in the box and the rest would be hidden away. This is what masking is like for me, as someone who had been told that I'm pretty bad at masking. Choosing what I bring up as support needs or sensitivities, but also knowing that if I bring up more than what's able to fit in this box, I will be considered too much. The big cats are labeled with things that are considered a lot to take care of, and kittens are things that most neurotypicals brush off. My game doesn't explain itself. The things I told you about aren't all explained on the game screen, but it's something that you simply experience by exploring my game. There isn't an end to my game. There's no way to win or lose, and the player can choose to quit whenever. I consider this game far from perfect, but I'm more than happy with it, because it also helped me understand what it meant to make myself fit in a neurotypical world for me. If I were to make a game about this topic again, I'd imagine it'd be very different, and I'd have different things to say, but I'd probably use a similar format. It really is a piece of the moment last year. I stepped away from this game feeling good about what I made, because it felt like I was speaking about something that felt important to talk about and get out of my system. And people could relate to it, which felt amazing because it meant I wasn't alone, and neither are they. That's a form of building community. Reparative game design is not focused on the player, but on the creator of the game. It's about exploring and understanding the experience you have and putting it in the context of a game. Your game doesn't have to speak to everyone, and you don't need to make yourself digestible. What's important about reparative game design is what you get out of it, and it's hard to do, because you're trying to take something that may be intangible, completely mental and not physical, and you're trying to visualize it and put it into a game, into an interactive experience. And you only really have your experience. So if you want to do something relational, it's hard because you don't have the experience of another person to compare to and relate to. That's why sometimes it's nice to work as a group and get others' opinions. Some of these points that I brought up today may not be very applicable to you because of the way you are designing games or in general exist. That's okay. I think part of the reparative game design process is understanding what is more useful to you or not useful to you. Take what you want from this and use the tools before you. And this isn't me trying to convince you to constantly make games using reparative game design. I'm just speaking to a way of game design that isn't considered as much. It can be a hard process, especially when you're trying it for the first time, but maybe something that makes you feel much better about a topic or helps you process or put a new experience in perspective. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is really appreciated. I highly recommend checking out Kara Storm's work. It is all really, really cool. One of the articles she has is actually an example of her doing reparative game design. And I could totally take questions now or comments. But other than that, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a lovely day. Yeah, I love this topic a lot, and I'm very happy to share it with people. Thank you. I will be here for the next while if you guys have any sort of comments or questions. But other than that, that is it. Yay! Feel free to head out if you want to. Thank you for coming. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm filling the void with words because there's not really any other speaker or anyone else to engage with verbally, so I'm just yapping. Void yum. Indeed. Yummy void. The more and more I reflect on the previous games I've made, the more and more I realize that I've been doing reparative game design by accident. Partly because my feeling of game design always comes from this perspective of wanting to be understood. And with that comes like just inherently a bit of reparative game design. But I've turned it into trying to contextualize an experience for myself and understanding that experience myself for my own understanding. And I think that's where I'm currently at, where I prefer to make games that speak to my experiences, but hopefully speak to someone else's. So we'll see how it goes in the future. I'm excited to make more and more, and I'm really looking forward to this game jam. Alrighty. I don't know if you have any questions, but if you don't, I am going to end this little event. It was lovely to have you. Thank you for tuning in and staying for the whole time. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun talking about this. I'm definitely very passionate about this topic and will be talking about it in the future in different contexts. Next week, I will be having a different presentation. It'll be kind of a very different tune, where I talk about some game jam tips that I personally have come across that work for me, which may even go against some of the concepts that reparative game design have, but that doesn't mean you can't take a bit from both, right? Okay, I'm going to officially end the recording. So to those watching the recording, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye bye.